The hall was enormous. It stretched so wide and so tall that the lights near the ceiling looked like distant stars. Thousands of seats curved around a central platform in great rings, each ring higher than the last, and every seat was filled. Delegates from 47 civilizations sat in their sections, each species separated by color-coded barriers of soft light. Some of them breathed gases that humans found poisonous. Some of them had no eyes. Some of them communicated through vibrations in the floor. But all of them were here today for the same reason. They were here to deal with the humans. The Grand Conclave of the Galactic Senate met once every 3 standard years. Today's session had been called early. That alone told everyone in the chamber how serious the matter was. Emergency sessions were rare. The last one had been called when the Drath Collective had tried to claim 3 star systems by force. That crisis had taken 11 years to resolve. This one, the Senate hoped, would take less than an hour. Elder Sekthal moved to the central platform slowly and with great ceremony. He was tall for a Vashari, his body long and smooth like a column of dark glass, his 4 eyes each pointing in a different direction. His kind had been part of the Senate for over 6,000 years. He had personally sat in this chamber for 212 of them. He had seen empires argue, collapse, and beg. He had watched species join the Senate, and species leave it. He believed, with every part of his ancient body, that he understood politics better than almost any living creature in the galaxy. He looked down at the human section and felt something close to pity. They had been members for only 31 years. 31 years was nothing. It was barely a breath. Most species spent their first century in the Senate simply learning how to speak properly in formal sessions. But the humans had not spent their time learning. They had spent it building ships, weapons, platforms, systems. In 3 decades, they had assembled the 3rd largest military force in the known galaxy. The species ranked first and second had taken thousands of years to reach that point. Humans had done it in 31 years. That was the problem. That was why the chamber was full today. Sekthal began to speak. His voice moved through the translation system and came out in 47 different languages at once, each delegate hearing their own tongue. He spoke about peace. He spoke about trust. He spoke about how the galaxy had spent long centuries building a fragile but real stability, and how that stability depended on no single species holding too much power. He was careful. He never said the word humans with hostility. He never accused them of anything. He simply painted a picture of a galaxy in balance, and then he painted a picture of what happened when that balance was disturbed. Everyone in the chamber understood what he was really saying. The resolution was called the Unilateral Disarmament Resolution 7. It had been written over the course of 2 years by a committee of 9 species, and it had been reviewed, adjusted, and quietly agreed upon by 46 of the 47 Senate members before today's session. Everything that happened in the chamber today was already decided. The vote was a formality. The debate was a performance. The only thing the Senate genuinely did not know was how the humans would react when they heard the result. Ambassador Priya Nair sat in the human section and listened. She was a small woman by human standards, and she looked even smaller in the vast chamber, surrounded by creatures twice her height and 10 times her mass. She had dark hair cut close to her head, sharp eyes, and the kind of face that gave nothing away. She had been Earth's chief diplomatic representative for 9 years. Before that, she had been a negotiator in conflict zones on 3 different continents during the last period of serious unrest on Earth. She had sat across tables from people who wanted her dead and smiled at them. She was not afraid of Sekthal. She was not afraid of any of them. She listened to the entire speech without moving. When the elder finished, the chamber filled with the sounds of 46 species, signaling approval in their various ways. Vibrations, lights, gases, sound pulses. Then the vote was called. It went exactly as expected. 46 in favor. 1 abstention. The humans did not vote against it. They simply did not vote. That confused several delegates. Voting against it would have been defiance. Voting in favor would have been submission. Not voting at all was something else, and no one was quite sure what. Sekthal turned his 4 eyes toward the human section. He asked, with the polished gentleness of someone who believed they had already won, whether the human representative wished to say anything before the session closed. Priya Nair stood up. She did not look around the chamber. She did not perform. She simply stood and spoke in a clear, even voice. She said that she had heard the resolution and understood its contents. She said that she respected the process of the Senate and the concerns that had brought the chamber together today. She said that a matter of this importance deserved a proper and formal response, one that reflected the full consideration of the United Earth Directorate and the people of Earth. She said that Earth's reply would be delivered within 30 days. Then she sat back down. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then the murmuring began. Delegates leaned toward each other. Translation systems buzzed with whispered conversations. Several species interpreted her words as agreement. Others were not sure. The Drath observers in the upper ring exchanged looks. The Yelm cluster delegates, 4 beings who shared a partial hive mind, simultaneously tilted their heads. Sekthal held his composure perfectly. He thanked the human ambassador for her words and closed the session. As the delegates began to leave, he allowed himself a small feeling of satisfaction. The humans were new. They were impressive, in their way. But they were 31 years old in a Senate that had been standing for 40,000. They would understand, in time, that this was simply how things worked. He did not notice, as he turned to leave, that Ambassador Nair had not moved from her seat. She was still sitting, completely still, looking at the central platform with an expression that was not anger, not sadness, not fear. It was the expression of someone who had already done the math. One of her junior aides leaned over and asked quietly what they should do next. Nair reached down and picked up her small data tablet. She stood, straightened her jacket, and looked at the aide with calm, dark eyes. "Send a message to the Directorate," she said. "Tell them we have 30 days. Tell them to open the archives." She walked out of the chamber without hurrying. Outside, the stars hung cold and silent over the curve of Kepler 442b, indifferent to what had just been decided in the hall below. They had been burning for billions of years before the Senate existed. They would be burning long after. Humans, of all the species that had ever looked up at them, were perhaps the only ones who truly understood that. The message reached Earth in 11 minutes. That was how long it took for a tight beam transmission to travel from the Senate's orbital station to the relay network and then down to the surface of the planet. 11 minutes after Ambassador Nair walked out of the Grand Conclave, the Secretary General of the United Earth Directorate was reading the full report in a secure room beneath the Geneva Accord Hall. He read it twice. Then he called a meeting. By morning, the room was full. They came from every branch of the Directorate: military advisors, diplomatic staff, historians, engineers, intelligence officers, and scientists. Some of them had been pulled from beds. Some had been in the middle of meals. One general, a broad-shouldered woman named Adisa, had been in surgery on her knee and had come straight from the medical bay with her leg still wrapped in a brace. No one told her to go back. No one would have dared. The Secretary General, a tall man named Chen Wei, stood at the head of a long table and explained the situation simply. The Senate had passed a resolution demanding full military disarmament. They had given Earth 30 days to comply. The resolution was legal under Senate rules. The vote had been 46-0. He paused after saying that. "Zero," said General Adisa from her seat, her voice flat. "They think it was 0. Our delegation abstained," Chen said. "Right." She nodded slowly. "So they think we accepted it. They think we're going to comply," said a man near the end of the table. He was older, white-haired, wearing a plain gray jacket with no insignia. His name was Dr. Halverson, and he was the head of the Lunar Military Archives, a department most people in the galaxy had never heard of, because it was not listed in any official Senate documentation. They looked at us for 31 years and decided they understood us. That's the mistake. The room was quiet for a moment. Chen looked around at the faces at the table. These were not people who panicked. They were not people who gave speeches about glory or made dramatic declarations. They were the kind of people who had spent their lives inside the machinery of human survival, maintaining the systems that kept 240 billion people across 12 star systems alive and safe. They understood complexity. They understood patience. And they understood, better than almost anyone, what humanity had come from. Let's talk about what we're actually dealing with, Chen said. Dr. Halverson, give them the history. Halverson stood up and moved to the main display at the center of the table. He pulled up a timeline. It started a very long time ago. He did not begin with spaceships or star systems. He began with ice. He talked about a period in Earth's ancient past when the planet had grown cold and the human species had been reduced to a few scattered groups trying to survive in a world that was trying to kill them. He talked about how humans had not gone extinct, even though the numbers at the time had been terrifyingly small. He talked about the diseases that had swept across continents in later centuries, killing millions, and how the survivors had not collapsed but had rebuilt, faster and more determined each time. He talked about the wars, not just one or two, dozens of them, world wars, civil wars, resource wars. He talked about how humanity had invented weapons capable of ending all life on Earth, and had then lived with those weapons pointed at each other for decades without using them, not because they couldn't, but because enough of them had understood the cost. That kind of discipline was not natural. It had been learned the hard way, through burial grounds and burned cities and the specific, quiet horror of knowing what you were capable of. He talked about the century of recovery before the first human ship had left the solar system, the environmental damage, the social fractures, the long, slow work of putting the species back together, and then the reach into space not as conquerors, not as explorers driven by romance, but as a species that had looked at its home planet and thought, we cannot put all of this in one place again. When Halverson finished, the room was silent. They voted to disarm the species that survived all of that, said a young intelligence officer near the door. She said it quietly, almost to herself. They didn't know what they were voting on, said General Adisa. They looked at our ship counts and our weapons platforms, and they got scared. They didn't look at where those things came from. They didn't ask why we built them. They never do, Halverson said, and sat back down. Chen let the silence hold for a few more seconds. Then he asked the only question that mattered. What do we show them? The discussion that followed lasted 6 hours. People argued, disagreed, revised, and argued again. Maps were pulled up and dismissed. Numbers were checked and rechecked. There were moments of raised voices and moments of long stillness. Someone brought food at hour 3, and people ate while they talked, because they were humans, and that was how humans handled long problems. By the end of the 6th hour, they had a plan. It was not a plan for war. It was not even really a plan for negotiation. It was a plan for a demonstration, a showing, clear and honest, of what humanity actually was, not a threat, not a performance, just the truth, laid out in deep space where anyone could see it. Chen signed the authorization document at the end of hour 6. His hand was steady. In the hours that followed, quiet orders moved through the Directorate's systems. Encrypted signals traveled to places the Senate had never mapped. Deep in the dark between stars, in cold corridors of space where no alien probe had ever traveled, systems began to wake up. Lights that had been dark for years turned on. Engines that had not been used in over a decade ran through slow, careful diagnostics. Crews who had been living quiet, anonymous lives in distant colonies got messages on secure channels and began to pack. None of it made any noise. None of it appeared on any Senate sensor. On the surface of Earth, in a city called Nairobi, a man sat on his front step in the early morning and watched the sun rise over the hills. He was old. He had fought in the last major conflict of Earth's pre-space era, a lifetime ago. He didn't know about the Senate's resolution. He didn't know about the meeting in Geneva. He was just watching the sun, the way humans had always watched it, with the tired, patient appreciation of a species that had earned every morning it was given. He didn't know that 30 days from now, the galaxy would understand what it had been looking at all along. He finished his tea, stood up slowly, and went inside. On the 29th day, the invitation went out. It was sent simultaneously to every Senate member species, addressed to their senior military observers, and senior diplomatic staff. It gave a set of coordinates in the neutral corridor, the long, empty stretch of space between human territory and the rest of Senate space that no species claimed and few visited. The message said simply that Earth wished to present its formal response in person, and that those present were welcome to bring as many observation vessels as they chose. It said that the demonstration would last 72 hours. It said that no weapons were to be charged or aimed at any time. It did not say what would be demonstrated. Some species thought it was a surrender ceremony. Others thought it was a final act of defiance before the resolution was forced. The Drath Collective sent 17 warships because they never went anywhere without warships, and old habits were hard to break. The Yelm cluster sent 3 research vessels packed with sensor equipment. Sekthal himself traveled aboard the Senate's ceremonial cruiser, a ship so old and so decorated that it was more museum than military vessel. He stood on its observation deck with his 4 eyes trained on the coordinates and told himself he was ready for whatever the humans intended. He was not ready. When the Senate fleet arrived at the coordinates, there was nothing there. Just empty space, black and cold, dotted with distant stars. The sensor readings were clean. No ships, no debris, no signals. Several delegates privately decided that the humans had simply not shown up, that this was some kind of statement, and began composing their reactions. Then Ambassador Nair's voice came over every ship's communication system at once. She thanked them for coming. She told them to watch the space directly ahead, approximately 40,000 kilometers out. She said that what they were about to see had never been shown to anyone outside the human military command. She said she hoped they would take the time to understand what it meant. Then she said, "Lights on." Space changed. It did not change slowly. It did not build up gradually. In the space of 2 seconds, 40,000 kilometers of empty dark became something else entirely. Ships appeared not emerging from faster-than-light travel, not uncloaking in any way the Senate's sensors understood, just suddenly present, as if they had always been there and the universe had simply forgotten to show them. 4,000 warships. They hung in perfect formation, arranged in deep rows that extended so far back that the ships at the rear were barely visible even on enhanced sensors. They were big. Not the biggest ships in the galaxy, but big enough that the sight of 4,000 of them together made the Drath commanders, who were not easily impressed by anything, go very quiet on their bridge. Nothing moved. The ships just hung there, running lights on, silent, patient. Several Senate vessels began trying to scan them. Their sensors slid off without returning useful data. The ships were coated in something that scattered energy readings the way still water scatters. Light, not blocking detection exactly, just making the information useless. They had been sitting in this corridor, the Senate observers slowly realized, for an unknown amount of time, hidden in plain space. Not in a nebula, not behind a planet, not in any of the places you would think to look. Just here, dark and quiet, for what could have been years. Sekthal's 4 eyes moved slowly across the formation. He began, for the first time in many decades, to feel something he did not have a clean word for. Nair's voice returned. She explained what they were looking at. She called it the Shepherd Fleet, a force assembled over 40 years through a construction program that existed entirely outside of any documentation submitted to the Senate. The ships had never been registered. The crews had never appeared on any official roster. The stations where they were built had been listed, in Senate filings, as deep space mining operations. She spoke without triumph, without anger. She described the fleet the way someone describes something that has always simply been there. Then she moved on. She talked about something called Project Lacuna, a display opened on the shared communication channel, available to every vessel present, showing a technical schematic. It took the Yelm researchers aboard their sensor ships several minutes to understand what they were looking at. When they did, one of them made a sound that translated roughly as, "That is not possible." The schematic showed a gravity tethering system, a network of devices that could be positioned around a star and, over 11 days, used to collapse that star's heliosphere, the protective bubble of energy that kept a solar system livable. It was not a weapon in any simple sense. It was a last resort. It was the answer to the question of what a species did when someone came to destroy its home and could not be stopped by any other means. It had never been used. Nair was clear about that. She hoped, she said, that it never would be. Then came the third part of the demonstration. And this was the part that changed the room, not just the observation decks of the Senate ships, but something deeper, something harder to name. Nair began reading from a list. She read slowly, clearly, and without commentary. The list contained 43 entries. Each entry described an incident: a raider fleet that had vanished in deep space, a biological weapon that had been released into a Yelm colony's water supply and then neutralized before it spread, the source of the neutralization never identified, an asteroid, 3 kilometers wide, that had been on a collision course with the Vos Hari homeworld 60 years ago and had quietly changed trajectory 11 months before impact, with no record of who had moved it. 43 incidents. Every one of them a threat to a Senate species that had been resolved without explanation, without credit, without any communication from Earth. Sekthal found himself doing the math without wanting to. 43 incidents, spanning 60 years, affecting, in some cases, species that had not yet even encountered humanity at the time. Nair let the list hang in silence for a moment. Then she said the final thing, the thing that the Senate observers would carry with them for the rest of their lives. She said that the weapon systems humanity was prepared to hand over under Resolution 7, the warships, the platforms, the arsenals they had officially registered with the Senate over 31 years of membership were already obsolete. They had been obsolete for 8 years. Earth had been rotating them out of active service quietly and replacing them with newer systems, the way you replace old tools when better ones become available. What the Senate had asked humanity to give up, Nair said, was the equipment humans had already stopped using. On the Drath command ship, a general reached out and turned off his weapons display, not because he had been ordered to, just because it felt, in that moment, like the right thing to do. Sekthal stood on his observation deck for a long time after the channel closed. The 4,000 ships of the Shepherd fleet stayed where they were, lights on, running quiet in the dark. They did not move forward. They did not power their weapons. They just waited, the way they had always waited, patient and invisible, and completely prepared. He thought about the vote he had organized, the 46 signatures, the careful, confident speech he had delivered in the conclave. He thought about how certain he had been. He looked at the stars, old and cold and entirely unmoved by the affairs of senates and resolutions and species who believed they understood things they did not. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. The emergency session of the Galactic Senate was called 3 days after the demonstration in the neutral corridor. It was the second emergency session in 30 days, which was something that had never happened in the Senate's recorded history. The delegates arrived differently this time. There were no side conversations in the corridors. No clusters of species leaning together and exchanging satisfied looks. They came in quietly and sat down, and many of them did not look at each other. The chamber that had felt like a courtroom 30 days ago felt like something else now. No one was entirely sure what. Ambassador Priya Nair arrived alone. She had no guards, no aides, no ceremonial escort. She walked through the tall entrance of the Grand Conclave in plain dark clothing, carrying only a single data tablet under one arm, and she moved to the central platform with the easy, unhurried pace of someone who had something to say and was not worried about saying it. The chamber was very large, and she was a small figure on that platform, but no one in the room thought of her as small. Sekthal sat in the front row of the Vos Hari section. He watched her take the platform, and he felt the strange, specific discomfort of a person who has believed they were right for a very long time and has only recently been shown that they were not. Nair did not begin with pleasantries. She did not thank the Senate for assembling. She looked around the chamber once, slowly, as though making sure she had everyone's attention, and then she began. She said that she had been asked 30 days ago to deliver Earth's formal response to Resolution 7. She said she would do that now. She held up the data tablet. She said the response had been filed into the permanent archive of the Galactic Senate that morning. She said it would remain there, accessible to any member species, for as long as the Senate existed. Then she set the tablet down on the platform's edge and spoke from memory. The first part of the response was a record. Nair described it simply as a history, though it was not the kind of history that was taught in Senate schools. It was the history of what humanity had done in the galaxy since making first contact, not the official history, not the diplomatic exchanges and the treaty signings, but the quiet history. The things done without announcement. She walked through the 43 incidents from the demonstration, one by one, and for each one she named the species that had been protected, the nature of the threat, and what the outcome would most likely have been without intervention. She did not rush. She let each entry settle. By the time she reached incident number 20, the Voss Hari elder Sek Thal had calculated that his own species was on the list 3 times. The asteroid, 60 years ago. A plague vector neutralized in a Voss Hari research station 41 years ago, attributed at the time to a fortunate equipment malfunction. A pirate network that had been dismantling Voss's Hari trade routes 20 years ago, and had simply stopped operating one season without explanation. He had represented his species in this Senate for over 200 years. He had never known. The second part of the response was not a record. It was a statement, and Nair delivered it with the same even, quiet voice she had used for everything else. She said that humanity did not carry weapons out of aggression. She said that anyone who had looked at Earth's history honestly, its full history, not just the convenient parts, would understand that. She said that humans had been a prey species once, small and slow and fragile, on a planet full of things that could kill them. She said that humanity had then spent 200,000 years learning how to not be killed, and that those lessons had not been forgotten just because humans now traveled between stars. She said that disarmament was not peace. She said that peace was a state that had to be maintained, the way you maintained a structure with attention, with effort, and with the understanding that something was always pushing against it. She said that the Senate's 46-member species, safe in their alliance and their long stability, had perhaps not had to think about this for a very long time. She said that humanity thought about it every day, because humanity remembered what happened when you stopped. She paused. Then she delivered the third part of the response, the actual answer to Resolution 7. She said that Earth would not be disarming. She said it plainly. Without heat. Without drama. The way you state a fact about the weather. She said it was not a rejection of the Senate or its authority, but a statement of what was necessary and what was true. She said that humans had a responsibility to their own people, to their colonies, and, based on the record she had just described, to a number of other species in this room that made disarmament impossible. Then she said something that no one in the chamber had expected. She said that in the spirit of genuine goodwill, Earth was extending a formal offer. The Shepherd Fleet, all 4,000 vessels, would be made available as a protective force for every Senate member species, free of any political conditions. No treaties required. No territories to be surrendered. No debt to be acknowledged. The fleet would operate as it always had, quietly, in the dark, watching the edges of explored space for things that meant harm. The only difference was that now the Senate would know it was there. The silence that followed was the longest silence the Grand Conclave had ever held during an active session. It lasted nearly 2 full minutes. No translation systems buzzed. No delegates leaned to whisper to each other. Even the Drath observers in the upper ring, who were professionally trained to show nothing, sat completely still. Then Sek Thal spoke. He did not speak as a delegate with a prepared statement. He spoke as an old creature who had just been shown something true and was trying to hold it correctly. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. He asked why. He said that he did not understand why humans had protected species that had not asked for help, had not paid for it, and had not even known it was happening. He asked why humans had done that in secret, without credit, for 60 years. Nair looked at him. She let the question settle. Then she said, because they needed it. The answer was so simple that several delegates initially thought the translation system had made an error. They checked. It had not. Sek Thal's 4 eyes held steady on the human woman standing on the platform. He said, after a long moment, that he had one more question. He said that he had spent 2 years working on Resolution 7, and that he had been sure, completely, professionally sure, that he understood the situation. He said that he now understood that he had not, and he asked how that was possible. How had humanity hidden so much for so long? Nair picked up her data tablet from the edge of the platform. She looked at the old Voss's Hari with something that was not quite a smile. It was more like patience, the specific patience of a person who has answered a simpler version of this question many times before. "You never asked us what we were," she said. "You looked at our ship numbers and got scared. That's not the same thing." She stepped down from the platform and walked out of the chamber. The 47 species of the Galactic Senate sat in the silence she left behind. Outside the Great Hall, the stars continued their slow, ancient burning. The same stars that had watched humans scratch at frozen ground 1,000 centuries ago. The same stars that watched them now. They had not changed. The humans under them had simply learned, over a very long time, how to look back. 1 year passed. The galaxy did not change the way explosions change things suddenly, visibly, with smoke and fire. It changed the way understanding changes things slowly, in small moments, in private rooms, and long silences. In the questions people started asking that they had never thought to ask before. Sekthal sat at his private desk on the Voss Hari homeworld and wrote in the journal he had kept for over 2 centuries. He had filled many volumes in that time. Wars, treaties, births of alliances and deaths of them. The long rhythm of galactic politics that he had watched and participated in since before most current Senate members were born. He was not a sentimental creature. He was practical, careful, and proud of his accuracy. He wrote facts, not feelings. But the entry he wrote on the 1-year anniversary of Ambassador Nair's address to the Senate was different from his others. He wrote about the asteroid, the one that had changed course 60 years ago. He had been young then, young for a Voss's Hari, still learning the Senate's procedures. He remembered, distantly, that there had been a brief period of concern in the scientific community before the asteroid changed trajectory, and then relief. And then the matter had been filed away as a fortunate coincidence of gravity and orbital mechanics. No one had questioned it deeply. No one had wanted to look too closely at good luck. He wrote, "The greatest error was not the vote. The vote was simply the moment the error became visible. The error was older. It was the assumption, made very early, that we already knew what humans were." He closed the journal and sat for a long time in the quiet of his study. He was trying to think of how many other things he had not known, how many other events in his 2 centuries of careful record-keeping had looked like one thing and been another. He did not find the thought frightening. He found it humbling, which was not a feeling he had experienced very often. He picked up the journal again and added one more line. He wrote, "We have been safe for a very long time. We forgot what made us safe." Across the galaxy, in a Voss's Hari diplomatic office on a space station near the edge of Senate territory, a young woman named Thessaly was reading. She was 23 years old, and she had just been assigned her first posting as a junior attaché. She was supposed to be reviewing trade filing procedures. Instead, she was reading a document that had been filed in the Senate's permanent archive 1 year ago and had since been downloaded more times than any document in Senate history. It was Earth's formal response to Resolution 7. She had already read it 4 times. Each time she got to the list of 43 incidents, she had to stop and breathe for a moment. Not because it was frightening, but because of the specific feeling it gave her, the feeling of looking at something familiar from a completely new angle and realizing it had always been a different shape than you thought. She had been assigned the diplomatic station near the frontier. It was a quiet posting, mostly paperwork. Nothing important happened there, she had been told. She thought about that now differently. She thought about all the things that might happen near a frontier that no one would know about. She thought about what it might be like to be a species that spent 60 years watching the edges of the known galaxy and never mentioned it to anyone. She submitted a transfer request the next morning. She requested to be posted to Earth. Her supervisor looked at the request with some confusion and asked her why. She said she wanted to understand. The transfer was approved. Resolution 7 was officially withdrawn from the Senate record 14 weeks after Nair's address. The vote to withdraw it passed 45 in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention. The species that voted against the withdrawal was a small, proud civilization called the Heth, who had drafted part of the original text and did not like admitting mistakes. The one abstention was the humans. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, the Senate's senior council met in private session and drafted a new document. It had been discussed quietly for months, and the drafting had taken 5 weeks. When it was finished, it was brought to the full Senate and passed by unanimous vote, including the Heth, who had argued against it in private and voted for it in public, which was their way. The document created a new body, the Galactic Security Council. It was meant to handle the kinds of threats that fell outside normal Senate jurisdiction: radar activity in deep space, biological hazards from uncharted systems, the slow, creeping dangers that did not announce themselves with flags and formal declarations. It needed members who understood these things. Humanity was offered a permanent seat. The seat had, in fact, been kept empty for 11 years. A quiet tradition among the council's founders, who had debated without telling anyone whether to include humans from the start, and had decided not to, and had regretted it, and had kept the chair there anyway, in case. Ambassador Nair was sent the formal offer on a Tuesday morning. She read it in her office on Earth, where she had spent most of the year since returning from the Senate. She set the document down on her desk and looked out the window at the city below, a city that had been rebuilt twice in its history, burned and replanted, that had lost half its population to disease in a century-long past, and had come back, that had been the site of the treaty that ended Earth's last major war, that was now a place of parks and streets, and ordinary people moving through ordinary days. She thought about the chair that had been empty for 11 years. She signed the acceptance document and sent it. On a colony world near the frontier, a girl named Yara was sitting on the back steps of her family's home, watching the sky darken. She was 8 years old. Her mother came out and sat beside her, and they both looked up at the stars as they appeared, one by one, in the deep blue above the hills. Yara had heard, at school, that there had been some kind of big meeting with the alien governments. She did not fully understand it. She asked her mother what had happened, in simple terms, the way children ask things. Her mother was quiet for a moment. She was a plain woman, not a diplomat, not a soldier. She repaired machinery for a living, and she was good at it. She thought about what to say. She said that the other species in the galaxy had gotten scared of humans and had tried to take away the things that kept humans safe. She said that humans had explained why that was not going to happen. She said that in the end, everyone had understood each other a little better. Yara considered this. Then she asked the question that had been in her mind since the teacher mentioned it. She asked, "Why were they scared of us?" Her mother looked at the stars. The frontier sky was very clear this time of year, no clouds, and you could see more stars than usual. They had been looking at those same stars since before they could name them. She said, "Because they looked at everything we have been through, everything we have survived, and they realized we are still here. That is a difficult thing to look at if you do not understand it." Yara thought about that. Then she said, "Do we understand it?" Her mother put an arm around her. She said, "We're the only ones who do." They sat there together as the stars came out, filling the sky above the frontier world. Ancient light, patient and unchanged. The same light that had fallen on the very first humans who ever looked up and wondered what was out there. They had wondered long enough. They had looked long enough. And somewhere out among those stars, 4,000 quiet ships moved through the dark, watching the edges of the known world, saying nothing, keeping the kind of vigil that only a species with very long memory and very deep scars truly understood. Not because anyone asked, because someone had to.